Back in the year 2000, Doctor Who had a terrible reputation with the general public. This was before any announcements of what would become the 2005 revival. No big budget episodes on Saturday nights, just a lingering perception of a dated, low budget sci-fi series. People who'd never seen an episode would roll their eyes and tell you it was all wobbly sets and rubber monsters. But I loved Doctor Who, and I wanted to prove to a friend that it was brilliant. I had one shot at this. Before I'd even looked at the VHS tapes on the shelves, he was saying, "Oh no, I don't think this is going to be my thing." So I had to pick the perfect story. Tomb of the Cybermen. A classic. But it's in black and white. What if that put him off? The Caves of Androzani. One of the all-time greats. But gun running in caves, what if that didn't grab him? No, I needed something quintessentially Doctor Who. A terrifying threat to destroy the Earth. A big scary monster at centre stage. That's it. I'd made my decision. I pulled out the VHS tape and said, "Watch this. You're gonna love it." This was it. I was about to take a member of the Not We and turn him into a Doctor Who fan. And the story I showed him was Warriors of the Deep.
There should have been another way.
Now I'm being flippant. Obviously trying to impress your friend by showing him Warriors of the Deep is a ludicrous idea. In fact, we'd struggle to find another Doctor Who story with a more appropriate metatextual final line. Let's have a look at an example of Doctor Who's reputation with the general public in the early 2000s.
So why did you cancel the show?
I had to watch these cardboard things probably clonking across the floor.
Well, you mentioned there the effects were very bad, and you said that's one of the reasons why you sort of got rid of it. Let's have a look at this. That is pretty bad.
Every expense spared there.
In 2014, Doctor Who magazine published the results of its 50th anniversary poll, in which fans posted their candidates for the best and worst classic stories or new series episodes. The lower ranks of the poll listed obvious examples that many fans would expect to see there. The Dominators, Time Flight, and at the very bottom, the Twin Dilemma. And Fear Her seems to have become the story that universally gets accepted as the worst example of 21st century Who. Warriors of the Deep was listed as number 226 of 241 possible choices. Why does this story not rank as the very worst that Doctor Who has to offer, when it's the very example that Michael Grade used to mock Doctor Who fans? Does the Myrka rank as one of the worst effects that classic Doctor Who has ever produced?
Get your people out of here!
Clear the airlock!
Fatiga, get out!
I think that's a definite yes. But classic Doctor Who has no shortage of candidates for what constitutes terrible special effects. Or bad monster costumes.
You mentioned Fumasi?
Doctor Who wasn't alone in this respect. Even Star Trek, with its bigger budgets and its reputation for slicker sci-fi, had its fair share of dated effects and monster costumes. And yet, judged purely on special effects, The Ark in Space arguably deserves to be way down the rankings in the DWM poll alongside stories like Warriors of the Deep. And yet The Ark in Space is considered a classic.
I think Ark in Space is a fabulous story. It's Tom Baker's second story. And he absolutely takes a hold of the part and makes it his completely in that episode. But it's a wonderful base under siege story. It is very much what Doctor Who is about, in the sense that its ambition is sort of greater than the resources available to it. But the ideas are very potent and delicious and wonderful and live with you.
Peter Capaldi nails it here. Doctor Who has always thrived on ideas that outshine the budget. We forgive the arc in space some terrible effects because it's such a fantastic story. In fact, we arguably make the case for its classic status in spite of the effects, not just as a counter to them. Equally, one of the worst examples of bad monster effects in Who history is Invasion of the Dinosaurs. And yet the DWM 50th anniversary poll listed it as 137 out of 241, roughly in the middle. And incidentally, the arc in space ranked as number 22 out of 241, just above Tomb of the Cybermen at number 23. Clearly this works on a sliding scale. Judged purely on effects, Invasion of the Dinosaurs and Ark in Space both deserve to be way down the rankings of most popular stories. But when you judge on both effects and story, both the Ark in Space and Invasion of the Dinosaurs massively shift up the rankings, with Ark in Space in particular considered an all-time classic. So if classic Doctor Who serials in particular falls somewhere on a sliding scale, does Warriors of the Deep have enough of a story to redeem even Myrka level bad effects? And explain why it's not quite at the very bottom of the list in the DWM poll.
It is very much what Doctor Who is about, in the sense that its ambition is sort of greater than the resources available to it. But the ideas are very potent and delicious and wonderful and live with you.
The year is 2084.
Little seems to have changed since my time.
Absolutely nothing, Tegan. There are still two power blocks, fingers poised to annihilate each other. Hexachromite gas. It's part of a sealing compound for undersea structures. It's lethal to marine and reptile life. I thought they would have banned it by now. No, it's a sea base. Rather special kind of undersea military colony.
There's one line in episode 1 which lightly conveys that the political situation is getting tense.
And given how unstable the current political situation is, an attack is not to be unexpected.
But this is not sufficient to create any sense of urgency about the current political situation or any effect that might have on a military base. By contrast, Day of the Daleks successfully conveys the stakes of the escalating political tension pushing humanity towards the possibility of World War III.
Humans are always squabbling over something, Brigadier.
Yes, well, this particular squabble looks like ending up in a third world war.
In South America and Southern Asia, reports say fighting has already broken out in many regions. All unit personnel are hereby placed on maximum alert.
And the moon base successfully conveys a sense of the stakes of the malfunctioning of the weather control machine, the gravitron.
This could be a major disaster if we can't stabilize the Earth's field.
If we lose that hurricane, Mr. Hobson, all hell will break loose on the Earth. I have a wife and family.
Well, you're not the only one. The collapse of the gravity would devastate half the globe. There'd be storms, whirlwinds, hurricanes...
I overheard your conversation. It's quite out of the question. You're not to shut down the gravitron under any circumstances. And that's an order.
So the stakes of Protonic War are never successfully conveyed. The potential world war feels more like a vague backdrop than an immediate and pressing threat. And into that weakly established backdrop, enter the Silurians.
This is our planet. We were here before man. We ruled this world millions of years ago. We built this place and suspended our lives till the atmosphere should return.
Your catastrophe never happened.
Their aquatic cousins, the Sea Devils, also went into hibernation.
This is our planet. My people ruled the Earth when man was only an ape.
Your people went into hibernation and abandoned Earth to its fate.
But unfortunately, in Warriors of the Deep, an excellent concept is thrown away with a single expository line.
Silurians?
The race that ruled this planet long before your species evolved.
The name Silurian is inaccurate.
Properly speaking, they should have been called the Eocenes.
And Sea Devils is just a nickname.
Give them the sea devil.
Yet both creatures refer to themselves as Silurians and Sea Devils throughout Warriors of the Deep.
For hundreds of years, our Sea Devil brothers have lain entombed.
Which doesn't make a lot of sense. Sea Base 4 is located right next to a Sea Devil base, and the Silurians travel to the base in their underwater ship and dock with the Sea Devil base, which is where episode 1 begins. Once inside the Sea Devil base, the Silurians fiddle about with some of the Sea Devil equipment, then revive the Sea Devils to use them as frontline warriors to capture the base. And of course they bring with them their doomsday device, the Myrka, which of course is only talked about briefly in episode 1.
The Myrka can deal with it.
And not seen until episode 2. The Silurian plan is to take over the base in order to launch the missiles against the opposing power block and wipe out half of the human population of Earth, presumably relying on the counter-missile attack from the opposing power block to destroy the other half of humanity.
A final solution.
Genocide. When everything you Silurians hold sacred forbids it.
We will harm no one. These 8 primitives will destroy themselves. We, Doctor, will merely provide the pretext.
So the Silurians justify this to themselves as they're facilitating the humans to destroy each other.
The 8 primitives have developed this weaponry. We cannot be held responsible for it.
Even though in practice, they undermine that by taking over the base only to try and push the button on the missile launch themselves. It's an incredibly simple storyline, perhaps almost to the point of underdeveloped. It's not clear why the Silurians have decided to destroy all humans now, given that they've been out of hibernation for roughly a century, assuming that the creatures we see in the Jon Pertwee stories are among the first to be revived. The script begs the question, if humanity is on the verge of annihilating itself through the poorly set up tense political situation, then why do the Silurians need to bother to invade the sea base to trigger a missile launch? If it's to ensure the situation actually triggers into mutually assured destruction, then this is not conveyed by the script. Perhaps it's because the Silurians have only recently discovered the coincidence of a Sea Devil base full of Sea Devil shock troops ready to revive and deploy. But if so, that explanation is missing from the script. However, the simplicity of this plot is disguised by the inclusion of a subplot. A subplot in which enemy agents have infiltrated the base and execute terrible dialogue.
The sudden demise of Lieutenant Michaels has paid us an immediate dividend.
You're a hard man, Nielsen. But you forget, I'm a doctor. Murder does not come easily to a person of my training.
Don't bleat, Salah.
In addition to using terrible dialogue, the enemy agents walk around looking suspicious and openly discuss their plans in earshot of other characters.
We shall neutralize the sea base, whatever happens. And with the help of Maddox, we'll destroy all vital circuitry to do with missiles and communication.
If it gets into enemy hands...
We understand, Commander.
I will return it to you immediately we're finished with it. Murder does not come easily to a person of my training.
Don't bleat, Salah.
The murder they refer to is of the sync operator, a human who connects to the missile system to become the futuristic equivalent of a missile launch key. A sync operator who was conveniently electrocuted.
The sudden demise of Lieutenant Michaels has paid us an immediate dividend.
By electrocuting the sync operator, the base is now dependent on a trainee sync operator who likely isn't up to the job should a missile launch be required.
I'm not ready.
But more importantly, he's a trainee sync operator who the enemy agents can conveniently remote control.
No!
Now kill her, Maddox.
Why they bother to remote control the sync operator rather than simply sabotaging the sync controller link isn't explained. Perhaps that would be too easy and would deny them the chance to look evil.
What are you doing here?
His duty, as I dictated.
Presumably the agents would only do this if the political situation means the two power blocks are on the verge of war. So the lack of clarity about the political situation makes this subplot even weaker than it already is. But maybe, simple though it is, this story could have been saved by great execution of its main base under siege plotline. The The Silurian plan is simple. Send in the Myrka to wreak havoc, then send in Sea Devil shock troops to capture the base. What could go wrong? A gigantic monster on the rampage and lots of action scenes with Sea Devils. The first attack by the Sea Devils sees their slowly breaking through an entrance hatch, with humans anxiously waiting for the fight to begin. The humans don't even do the obvious thing and take cover behind a few boxes, as we see in a scene of attackers breaking through a few stories later in Resurrection of the Daleks. The whole attack by the Sea Devils is completely undermined by how slowly the Sea Devils move. So with an ineffective Sea Devil attack, the execution of the story is dependent upon how well the Myrka scenes are executed. The door of Airlock 1 was buckling inwards before their eyes, shaken by a series of incredibly heavy blows. It looked as if the door would give at any moment. That was the target novelisation by Terrance Dicks. The realisation of it in practice is rubber doors. It's supposed to be a gigantic green monster which bashes its way into the base and goes on a rampage. Yet we find out that it's been augmented by the Silurians and given the ability to electrocute its victims. Why have a big, scary, intimidating monster in the story, but then not have it use its size to kill people? The Doctor explains that the Myrka is a cyborg creature. Apart from its bashing down the doors, its electrocution ability renders its huge size completely redundant throughout the story. In which case, why have it at all? Why not have a robot shooting electric beams? But then that wouldn't be a big scary monster which bashes down doors. So instead we're left with this cyborg creature. It feels like the story was built around the idea of a big scary monster rampaging through the base, but at some point the production team lost faith in the concept. Perhaps there was a fear that they didn't want to actually have a big scary monster which tears its victims apart to kill them. Mary Whitehouse might have complained, although she probably would have anyway. Or perhaps as time went on, they realised that it might not be practical to show this costume manoeuvring through the base killing people, and so added an ability to kill base occupants simply by touching them. Its augmented nature isn't fundamental to the story, so it's possible that this is a late addition to the script. But the addition of those lines suggests the production team losing faith with the fundamental concept of a big scary monster rampaging through the base. Clearly fear of it not being realised on the screen didn't stop them from keeping it in the script, so why the change? You can't help but think that the weak overall storyline provoked a fear that the story would be nothing without the Myrka. So maybe the Myrka was supposed to be a gigantic monster which rampages through the base, killing lots of people and causing mass devastation. But that idea doesn't really seem to fully fit with the script. After the Myrka breaks into the base, there's no real sense of urgency from anyone that isn't actually in close contact with the creature. But of course, in typical Doctor Who fashion, the Doctor will save the day. His plan is to arrange for an ultraviolet converter to be delivered to him, which he then calmly alters to boost its intensity, since the Myrka is sensitive to light. So he's going to blind a creature that struggles to see where it's going anyway. I suppose it makes sense that the Myrka doesn't like bright light, as it's used to living in the darkness deep at the bottom of the oceans. Although for a creature that's used to the darkness, it doesn't seem to be fazed by the very brightly lit sea base. And of course, with our already blinded creature rampaging through the base, there's no time to spare, and so the Doctor has time to slowly explain to everyone what he's doing, while he methodically alters the ultraviolet converter. The script doesn't hint at any sense of urgency from the situation. Even the Doctor's first line when realising they're dealing with the Myrka undermines any sense of threat.
Oh dear.
What is it?
The Myrka.
But let's return to our subplot for a moment, because with the Myrka rampaging through the base, for no really good reason,
Wait in the escape pod, I'll join you when I can.
Dr. Solo decides to walk through the corridors of the base, whereupon we have one of the most unforgivable scenes in Doctor Who history. It's clear that the intention was to karate chop the Myrka, Combine an attempt to karate chop with actors in a Myrka costume who can barely see where they're going, and you have a disaster. But what on earth were they thinking, having a character try to karate chop a big scary monster that electrocutes everything it touches? And the sad thing is, having filmed this, they couldn't cut it because it shows the death of a character. So they had to leave it in. Although personally, I think it would have been better to just cut it and leave the story with a plot hole. There are several explanations thrown out as to why the Myrka was such a disaster. Visual effects designer Matt Irving has said that there was a tendency among directors to think, oh, we've spent a lot of money on this effect, so we've got to see it. To which he would reply, no, remember Alien, you hardly saw the creature.
Oh, here comes the galloping Myrka.
Oh, this is...
See, it's just too... The shots just ain't going to work like that.
No.
In Alien, Ridley Scott hid the monster in the shadows, barely showing the creature at all. The DVD includes a deleted scene deliberately cut because Ridley Scott thought it showed too much of the creature and revealed it as a man in a costume. The other approach is seen in James Cameron's Aliens. Instead of keeping the creatures in the shadows, James Cameron made quick cuts, never holding on a shot of an alien for more than a couple of seconds. This method works especially well in Aliens because it features multiple creatures attacking, allowing for constant cutting between them, creating a fast-paced, chaotic feel. Even in classic Doctor Who, this technique had been used before. The giant snake in Kinder was a large monster, but it was mostly stationary and cuts to the creature were kept brief. The vision mixer could cut to the snake for a moment, then cut away, making it at least partially effective despite its limitations. However, even with good direction and quick cutting, for decades Kinder had had a reputation of being a good story badly let down by the snake at the end. This was until the 2011 DVD release, which gave the option of watching a version with the snake replaced with modern CGI. But Warriors of the Deep was a different challenge entirely. The Myrka wasn't stationary, it couldn't be hidden in the shadows, and it wasn't part of a larger swarm of monsters attacking the base. It was a single giant creature that needed to move through the base and physically attack people, meaning there was no opportunity to film extra footage and edit around the monster later. In a scenario like Kinder, this wasn't a problem, because you could have one camera briefly showing the snake before switching back to an actor's reaction. But when you have scenes of a single monster attacking a single character directly, there's nothing to cut away to. You're stuck holding the shot, which means the audience gets a full, unbroken view of the Myrka and all its flaws. The script was fundamental to the problem. The Myrka wasn't written to be obscured, it wasn't written to be seen only in glimpses. Instead, the story demanded that it be shown in full, stomping through brightly lit corridors, attacking and electrocuting people as it went. The Myrka was doomed from the start. Writer Johnny Byrne has claimed that he envisioned the sea base as dark and rusty, like an old submarine, implying that the director failed to realise his vision, particularly by making everything far too brightly lit. Director Pennant Roberts has countered that Johnny Byrne's script always included the Myrka, a creature that was inherently difficult to realise within the constraints of a multi-camera studio. In Pennant Roberts' defence, I have noticed when editing it is difficult to find continuous shots of the Myrka, so he did try to cut away from it as much as possible, but unfortunately the nature of the creature didn't make that easy for him. Script editor Eric Sayward has stated that he would have fought hard to keep the Myrka out of the script entirely. He also noted that Johnny Byrne's scripts were often too long, requiring significant edits. It's possible that the thin plot and weak subplot we see in the final version were a consequence of substantial script material being cut. And special effects designer Matt Irving points out that they had very limited time to create the Myrka due to studio days being brought forward because of Margaret Thatcher calling a snap election. But the common theme of every interview is that everyone involved in the production seems to agree that the finished product was a disaster. Quite simply, they were trying to pull off what Jurassic Park pulled off a decade later, but without the CGI, the production methods, the time, or the budget necessary. However, the people involved definitely deserve credit for their ambition. It must be remembered that it's very easy for us to look back in hindsight in a world where we have Aliens and Jurassic Park to show us how to do it. So why isn't Warriors of the Deep right at the bottom of the DWM 50th anniversary poll, and instead actually rate above The King's Demons and Paradise Towers? I personally find that thinking of the worst story, Warriors of the Deep doesn't come to mind as readily as some of the others, such as Twin Dilemma. And I think that comes back to the fact that the finished product was such a disaster. And it's the one story that seems to confirm all of the negative stereotypes of Doctor Who. It can be painful to watch a story which so thoroughly disappoints. However, we're back to the idea that Doctor Who fans give credit for ideas. So perhaps it's as simple as Warriors of the Deep is not at the very bottom of the poll, because at least the production team are given credit for trying, whereas some of the stories near the very bottom of the poll, such as Twin Dilemma, are just boring. And yet there's something strangely haunting about that disappointment, because in a way, Warriors of the Deep wasn't just aiming high, it was aiming a decade ahead of its time. A deadly creature on the rampage, tearing through a confined environment. That's the blueprint for something great. They were reaching for what Jurassic Park would later perfect, just without the tools to make it work. And that might be the most frustrating thing about Warriors of the Deep. Not that it was bad, but that with the right resources, it could have been brilliant. What we got was a disaster, but what they were trying for, that would have been a classic.